Today, we're diving into one of modern history's most chilling criminal cases. It's a story that really makes you question the very nature of trust and the terrifying ways it can be abused. So on one hand, you've got this image of a beloved family doctor, someone you'd trust with your life. And on the other, the reality of a cold-blooded, prolific serial killer. And that's the whole puzzle of Harold Shipman's story. How could one man possibly be both? How does a figure of healing become an agent of death? To even begin to understand this, we have to start with the mask he wore. See, for years, Harold Shipman wasn't some monster lurking in the shadows. Nope, he was a pillar of his community, hiding these horrific acts behind a perfect facade of medical professionalism. And what's so deeply unsettling about this is just how normal it all seemed. Shipman built a really successful practice in Hyde, Greater Manchester. Everyone knew him as polite, dependable, and just deeply caring. But this image he built, it wasn't just a cover, it was his most powerful weapon. It gave him unquestioned access and authority over his patients. Okay, so behind that trustworthy mask was a method of murder that was as simple as it was just terrifyingly effective. He turned the everyday act of a routine house call into a death sentence. His process? It was a complete and horrifying abuse of medical procedure. He'd visit a patient, usually in their own home, give them a fatal overdose, and then use his authority as a doctor to sign the death certificate, just making up a natural cause. He literally folded his crimes into the mundane, everyday paperwork of his job. And the weapon he chose was diamorphine, which is basically medical-grade heroin. Now, as a doctor, he had totally legitimate access to this incredibly potent painkiller. This meant he could stockpile it without raising any suspicion at all. A drug that's meant to ease suffering became his tool for murder. And this chart, wow, this really shows you who he targeted. The vast majority of his victims were elderly, and mostly women. He preyed on the vulnerable, the people whose deaths, tragically, were less likely to be questioned by society. They trusted their doctor completely, never for a second suspecting that he was the single greatest threat to their lives. The scale of what he did is it's staggering. The official inquiry confirmed at least 215 victims, but the real number could be over 250. We're not talking about a handful of cases here. This was a killing spree that went on for decades, making him one of the most prolific serial killers in all of recorded history. So the big question is, how did he finally get caught? I mean, after all those years of operating right there in plain sight, it all came crashing down because of a single, arrogant mistake. Just one case that broke his careful pattern and finally raised the alarm. And that case involved a woman named Kathleen Grundy. She was a wealthy former mayor of Hyde. After she died suddenly in 1998, her family was completely shocked to find a crudely forged will, leaving her entire estate to Dr. Shipman. It was pure greed. That was his undoing. And that one single suspicious document was the thread that investigators would pull to unravel everything. So once the authorities started looking into Shipman's practice, they realized this was about so much more than a forged will. They started examining death records, and slowly, a horrifying pattern began to emerge that absolutely no one had ever noticed before. And this is the data that just blew the whole thing wide open. Investigators compared the death rate at Shipman's practice to other local doctors, and the difference was, you can see it. It was undeniable. The bar chart shows it so starkly. His patients were dying at a dramatically, unbelievably higher rate. The numbers themselves told a story of industrial-scale murder. With evidence like that, it was pretty much overwhelming. In January of 2000, Shipman went on trial for 15 murders, and that was just a sample chosen to represent his overall pattern. He was found guilty on all counts, plus the forgery, and he was sentenced to life in prison with absolutely no possibility of parole. And the verdict sent shockwaves across the entire nation. I mean, can you imagine? The betrayal was almost impossible to comprehend. A doctor's whole purpose is to heal, to preserve life. The realization that one had used that sacred trust to do the exact opposite, it just shattered public confidence in the medical profession itself. But, if there's any positive outcome from a tragedy this immense, it's that it forced a complete reevaluation of the entire British medical system. It sparked huge reforms designed to make sure something like this could never, ever happen again. Yeah, the official Shipman inquiry led to all these sweeping changes. Things like stricter controls on dangerous drugs, major reforms to how death certificates are handled, and new oversight bodies to actually monitor doctors. And crucially, it also created better protections for whistleblowers, people who might raise suspicions in the future.
But Harold Shipman never confessed. He never explained why he did what he did. On the eve of his 58th birthday, he took his own life in his prison cell, and he took all his secrets with him. He denied his victims' families any final sense of closure or understanding.
And that really leaves us with the case's big, unsettling question. Sure, the systems were reformed, but the core issue, it still remains. Shipman's ultimate weapon wasn't the poison. It was the trust we instinctively place in people who are meant to care for us. So the question for all of us is, when that trust itself is weaponized, how do we ever truly protect the vulnerable?